As mentioned in the opening, today we're going to be talking about the board game Monopoly. When I was growing up, my dad was really competitive. He'd play with me and my younger siblings before we were really at a rational age to think about strategies for a board game as complicated as Monopoly. So he'd walk right over us. One of the things my dad was very good at using Monopoly to teach us was the art of negotiation. He really was quite talented at making deals that looked mutually beneficial, but would help lead him to win more often than not. And oddly enough, my mother would never really play the board game with us because she didn't like the fact that my dad traded. She thought that the nature of the game was to do no trading at all and just play, going round and round and round and round the board until someone eventually goes broke. If this is the way that you learned how to play the game, I'm sorry. I don't think it's near as much fun, and I think it takes way longer than when you are engaging in the art of trading. I know it says in the rules that trading is part of the game. Making deals is sort of a focal point to the game. I'm not going to tell you the best way to make deals. I'm not even going to tell you the most statistically likely places for players to land when it comes to strategy. What I'm more interested in today is the property development strategies for Monopoly. Let's start with a fairly risky strategy my dad liked to implement. Whenever he'd get a matching set of properties or he'd get a Monopoly, he would take all other properties in his possession and mortgage them in order to maximize the amount of cash he had on hand. And really, he would do this so that he could develop properties faster by putting houses or even hotels on them before any of us brothers had a chance. In reality, I'd say this is a go big or go broke sort of strategy, as if it doesn't work and someone else has a fairly developed property ahead of this being implemented or shortly thereafter, you could end up landing on a very expensive property in the game and having to liquidate the real estate that you had developed on the board in order to pay your bill and avoid losing the game. Now, because I don't want to risk losing the game of money in real life, this isn't a personal financial strategy that I take from Monopoly and try to imitate in my personal financial life. I try to avoid leveraging myself, with the mere exception of having a mortgage so that I could get into the home ownership game. Now, this leads to the dichotomy of strategy that I really want to focus on today. Let's say you own two Monopolies, the pink set and the green set. The pink properties being Virginia Avenue, States Avenue, and St. Charles Place. While not quite as coveted as the orange set among my siblings, I have settled and won the game using the pink Monopoly. And if it's been a while since you've played, the green properties are going to be Pennsylvania Avenue, North Carolina Avenue, and Pacific Avenue. Okay, consider this situation. You own these Monopolies. There are 5 of you playing, including yourself, and nobody has any development on any of the properties. It's going to naturally be cheaper to build houses on the pink Monopoly over the green. It'll be $100 per house. Also assume at this stage of the game that you have $1,000 to work with. Now, one lesson that my dad eventually taught me to help me become better at Monopoly was that 3 houses is really an efficient place to be when it comes to property development in this game. Let's take Virginia Avenue, for example. Without any houses on that property, rent is $12. With 1 house, it's $60. With 2, it's $180. But once you get up to 3, it goes up to $500. That first house typically takes rent and multiplies the amount of revenue you get by 4 or 5x. Meanwhile, a second house for most monopolies in the game will triple the amount of rent from owning only 1 house. Now, these multipliers are great, but we're still starting with relatively low numbers. Now, having 3 houses versus 2 is typically more than double the rent of having just 2. But that's where the multipliers really slow down. You do not double the amount of rent that you have again by adding simply 1 more level of development to any property in Monopoly, at least not to my knowledge. So the point of diminishing returns is arguably right around 3 houses. And in my experience playing the game, once someone has 3 houses, you really don't want to land on that property because that's when the rent starts to look high enough to sting you. Okay, back to the game that we're considering. Remember, there are 4 other players other than you, and let's say they're all getting ready to run up on the second stretch of the board where your pink properties are. Knowing that 3 houses is the point of diminishing returns, you take $900 of your $1,000 and you buy 3 houses on each of these properties. Now, of the 4 other players, 2 of them end up landing on your property. This yields you a profit of $1,000. Now, while this is great, a very active strategy would be to remove some or all of the houses on the pink properties once all 4 players have passed, and utilize the capital you get to develop the green properties that you have. Now, the problem with this is the green properties are more expensive to develop. They are $200 per house. The other problem that needs to be overcome is a rule that not every Monopoly player is aware of, and that is when you destroy a house or sell a house from a developed property, you can only get back half of what you put into it. So we spent $100 per house to make our pink properties work. When we sell them, we only get $50 back from each. We had 9 houses. That yields $450 back. Okay, let's do the math. We had $100 left over from the initial development, and we made a profit of $1,000. Then we sold all 9 houses and got $450 back. That leaves us with $1,550 to develop our green properties. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. We don't have enough capital to put 3 houses on all 3 of the green properties. So we're going to put 2 on 2 of them and then 3 on the last one. Because of where the other players are, and you know that 7 is the most likely number to be rolled, you decide to put the 3rd house on Pacific Avenue. Now, here's the thing. Because there are 3 houses on Pacific Avenue, if one player lands on it, you get $900. If it's the other property next to it, it's only $390 because there are only 2 houses. Now, let's think critically about this. We just spent $1,400 to develop the green properties. If we're going to do the same strategy again, where these get bulldozed, we need to make at least $700 profit in order to make it worth it. This means that we're basically banking on at least one player landing on the property with 3 houses, or 2 players landing on properties with at least 2 houses. If this is the case, then we can bulldoze the houses that again exist on the green properties and redevelop the pink ones, iteratively increasing the amount of homes that we're able to put on them until we get to the point where we're moving hotels back and forth. Now, again, this is an active strategy, and it has some inefficiencies, mostly because when you sell a home, you lose half of the equity that you put into it for this game. And in this case, it is a risk. If no players were to land on the green properties after we developed them, and we wanted to move the homes back over to the pink properties, we'd end up coming out behind. See, if I did my math right, we'd only have $850 to redevelop the pink properties, which means we would be able to put 3 houses on 2 properties, and the last one only gets 2 houses. However, it's still possible that we come out ahead. It's a risk, and it's not guaranteed, but you might come out ahead with this strategy and be able to increase your revenue faster from the other players and force them into bankruptcy at an accelerated rate, thus winning the game. But is this the safest strategy? Instead of something so active and something that generates so much overhead expense for us by bulldozing houses and building them, what if we went about this strategy with a buy and hold approach? Let's unwind the game to before there were any houses, and let's put the same 9 homes on the pink properties. And again, we make $1,000 from it, keeping all things the same. But in this particular case, we're not going to bulldoze the 3 houses that we have on the pink properties. We're just going to leave them. We're going to take that $1,000 profit and immediately turn around and invest it into the green properties. That $1,000 is enough to buy 5 houses. Now, it's not quite the 7 homes that we were able to get the first time around, and that means that the property with only 1 home on it, let's say it's Pacific Avenue, would only yield a rent payment of $130 if someone were to land on it. But because we're not bulldozing homes here, that is just pure profit and gain. We don't have to hit a minimum threshold of, like last time, $700 in order to be moving forward with our strategy. In fact, as long as we don't incur a large rent payment ourselves in the game, we're going to be able to continue to come out ahead. It might be a little bit slower, but it's lower risk. Let's say you move forward with this strategy and then try a hybrid later down the road. You get 3 houses on all 6 of your properties, all 3 of the pink and all 3 of the green. Once you have 3 homes on all, you start putting the 4th homes on. But the 4th home, because it's past the point of diminishing returns, is the one that you're willing to bulldoze in order to redevelop the properties where more players are likely to land in the upcoming set of turns. In this situation, we have our base established before we start taking on more risk. The interesting thing with the nuance here is that it's nuanced, that it doesn't rely on simply being active or buying and holding. It plays a little bit of both. And I think the analysis to see what's optimal is going to be dependent on how many players are playing, what other properties look like, whether they're developed or not, what other strategies are that are being implemented by the other players. And past this point, it gets a little difficult for me to speculate the strengths of different strategies here on the podcast within the confines of this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to you now. What do you think is the optimal strategy? Do you think being active in moving the houses back and forth is optimal, even though it's higher risk? Do you like the idea of buying and holding? Or would you buy and hold up until you got to a certain point that you determined to be optimal and then start moving properties around? And if you're a buy and hold person, do you focus on the pink properties until they're all hotels before even beginning with the green properties? Or do you try to diversify once you hit a point where the principle of diminishing returns starts to eat at you? If you're listening on a platform with a comment section, please let me know below.